Hi, everyone. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I'm here with Kelsey Ricci, and she is a licensed funeral director with 4 years of experience. She's driven by a commitment to family advocacy and transparency in funeral service. She was inspired by the care her family received after the loss of her grandmother. She developed a deep interest in natural and green burial practices while serving diverse communities. At Thibadeau Mortuary Service, a veteran and family-owned funeral home, Kelsey works to ensure families never have to choose between affordability and a meaningful, culturally respectful farewell, while empowering them to take an active role in honoring their loved ones. So welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you so much for having me today, Ed. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. It's our pleasure to have you. And why don't we get started by learning a little bit more about the history of Thibadeau Mortuary and how that came to be?
Yes, so Tibido Mortuary Service came to be actually when the owner, Jamie Tibido, he just started it primarily as a removal company for other funeral homes. So this is when a funeral home would not either have the staff or the time to complete the transfer of the deceased into the care of their funeral home. So they would call him. So Jamie really did just start with a cot and a van, respectfully carrying out the transfer process on behalf of other funeral homes. And then, he got to thinking and seeing the need within the immediate community that we are a part of in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And he decided to go into funeral service himself and start his own funeral home with the goal, as you stated before, of no family having to choose between the financial situation and the dignified carrying out of whichever method of disposition that the family chooses.
Well, absolutely. And it's a noble profession. It's not one everyone's prepared to enter into, but people don't really truly understand how difficult it can be, when it comes to dealing with emotions and with family. So you guys are doing a great job, and that's great that he was able to make that transition. A lot of people don't even understand that there are these types of services that exist, as far as transportation and removal and all that kind of stuff. So that's exciting for you guys.
Yes, thank you
Uh,
very much.
so
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Tell me a little more about your personal journey within the funeral industry. I mean, I know, I mentioned it in your bio, but what was the real inspiration of that event that when had you enter the death care world?
Yeah, so as you stated before, it kind of the precipice was the death of my grandmother, who I was very, very close to. It was a completely devastating loss for me. And I remember when she was in the process of dying, she was very, very sick and she had lost a lot of weight. And we are traditional Irish Catholic, some of my family. So we were going to do the whole open casket, 2-day viewing, then we're going to go to church. And I just remember my first thought was, I cannot look at her in that casket. Like, it's not going to look like her. I was not prepared at all. And then when I walked in and I saw her, it looked just like she did before she got sick. And, that really helped me work through the immense amount of grief that I was having at the time. And that inspired me to get into funeral service. I know now through my journey in funeral service so far that the same, almost similar results can be achieved without embalming. Families can have that farewell and have that moment with their person without all of these invasive procedures, which is really, really important to me to educate families about. Because I feel like in traditional funeral service, it was always like, okay, they're getting embalmed. And families feel like they really didn't have a choice in the matter. So it's all about letting them know their choices and being realistic and honest with the family.
Absolutely. It's all about transparency and a little bit of education. And it's a hard subject matter, obviously, at the time of to have that conversation. But, being able to have the ability to offer these options, that's what's most important.
Correct.
And, you know, I, I'd like you to explain a little bit about the services that Thibodeau offers. I'm sure that, they offer all the what we would consider traditional, but what was it that had Thibodeau's interest in offering green burial services? Was it a personal choice? Was it the experience that you experienced, or was there a community need, or a combination of all?
I think It was a combination. Thibodeau was offering natural green burials before I came on board, but obviously with me coming on board, I'm a huge advocate for the natural burial process. And we are seeing more and more interest from the public about this. But they, again, back to the education thing, they're not really sure what their options were. So being able to sit down and offer natural burial to families and kind of explain the process really does make the families feel better. And I also see through the natural burial process that families do really want to be more involved in the funeral process. So that is something that Thibadeau Mortuary Service offers. We offer our space to have the family, wash the body, get them dressed, really just their level of comfort with being offering what they would like to do with their loved one to honor them. And we also offer that service in their home as well, if that, that can also provide a more meaningful space, because it could have been the home that they grew up in and lived with mom or dad, and mom and dad have been in the house for 50 years. So that's really special and important to us that we're able to give family that agency to even choose.
No, and that's wonderful work that you're doing. I mean, to be able to offer the services within the home, I think is really important. As much as funeral service had changed 150 years ago, bringing us to the traditional market that we're in, it never really left us, within our spirit as to how we would like to care for our loved ones. We just kind of lost our way, and it's really important for the viewers to know that forward-thinking funeral providers like Tibido and you, Kelsey, are what's going to change the face of the funeral industry in the future. It's happening now, but you're really going to become looked at very differently than probably in the past, and especially when you're able to be so intimate with the families within their home and in these types of settings. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
very important to me because I feel like also along with that is that, families are almost a little, timid. Obviously, if somebody's lucky, we're just meeting them when this is the only funeral they've had to plan. So, I think also kind of humanizing the industry and having these talks are so, so important. Just saying, hey, your funeral director is a person too, and they're here not just because it's their job, but because they really do care that you lost your person and they want to make sure that you have the experience with the funeral that you envisioned in order to help you process your grief.
Absolutely. And for the viewers that are watching this, just keep in mind that, people like Kelsey and Thibodeau, this is something they carry with them on a daily basis, and it could probably be very difficult, so you guys have a lot of heavy lifting, a job that, is very fulfilling when it comes to seeing that you're helping the families, but you experience a lot of grief and, offering these types of services where you see how it changes the way people are thinking and how they're feeling in the moment. I'm sure has to be very helpful when it comes to that, because you're definitely carrying a heavy load.
Yes.
That's for sure. So,
That's for sure.
tell
Yeah.
us, yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your involvement with the charitable organizations like Little Angels program. How are you guys involved with that?
Yes, so there is a program with Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. That's one of the top children's hospitals in the country. And, families go there for treatment and things of that nature. And, unfortunately, sometimes the treatment isn't always successful and the patient passes away. So we have started working with them to provide what's known as the Little Angels program. And this allows us to offer free cremation and very heavily subsidized burials for the families who are going through this unimaginable loss. I mean, it's just, I can't even begin to imagine the loss of a child is absolutely devastating. So for us to be there and be like, hey, you know what, we've got this. Again, the last thing we want families to worry about is, do I have the money to do this? Everybody deserves a dignified end of life disposition carry out, including these families who are going through this unimaginable loss. So we just wanted to make it more accessible to them. So again, they felt like they didn't have to choose between the financial situation and how they want to see their loved one off.
Well, wow, that's wonderful work you guys are doing, and like I said, it's a noble profession, and people affected in that way. Any way to make it a gentler return, I think is certainly important because it's really not the time to make big important decisions, and I'm glad to hear you guys are able to do that.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
very, very rewarding. It's from a personal standpoint, it is always very difficult when there's a child involved. But like you said, the last thing we want them to think about is, oh my goodness, do I have the money to do this?
Right. No, that's great. So anyone listening to this, if there's any way you can support that program, I don't know if please do because those things are important. I always, I look at a lot of these startups and a lot of these companies that, have venture capitalists, and I often say to myself, geez, if they just would just give that money to something like St. Jude's Children's Hospital or, let's make a bigger difference, with
Yes.
those dollars if you can. So, yeah, please support projects like that. And I know because I've dealt with a lot of customers, here in the New Jersey area that actually have come up from Maryland. But over the last, probably 10 years, there's been a lot going on down there. A lot of spaces were created, which is wonderful. And, you know, I guess that would bring me to my question. Have you seen an interest, in eco-friendly funeral options like in your particular area? And if so, what local cemeteries are you working with that offer these green burial options?
Yes, so like I said before, the community is definitely asking more questions, which is the first step, right? And then that allows us to educate people and have them say, wow, I didn't know that was an option. And we are very lucky to work with a few very nice natural burial cemeteries. One of them is Serenity Ridge in Woodlawn, Maryland. That's more in the Baltimore County area. And more recently, we've had Reflection Park in Silver Spring open and Morris Orchard in Frederick. So, the need is there, and these places are popping up and they're being run by absolutely wonderful people, which also makes our job easier because, once we direct the families to a cemetery, it's nice to know that we have trusted people, especially at Serenity Ridge. I mean, they're establishing an arboretum there. It's an absolutely gorgeous place.
No, I agree. I know the outfits that you're working with, and they're all great people, and you are lucky to have them, and it's great to have that in the DC, Baltimore metro area. You know, so I mean, a lot has happened over the last few years, and that's wonderful news. So, obviously, you've had some experience now with natural burial, and what our viewers always love to know how it affects the people who are actually performing it. So, is there any particular green funeral services that you've conducted that were particularly memorable or impactful? They all are, but is there anything that really jumps out at you that was that you could share that might inspire others?
Yes, so you said it best. Every burial and every family and every method of disposition is important. One that really stands out to me was I was working with a family who had lost their loved one, and they knew immediately that they wanted green burial, which off the bat, I love that. There was still a little bit of education throughout the process about, because they did want to have the funeral at home before going to the cemetery, which was I was happy to accommodate. And it was just so, you know, beautiful once we got the decedent back home and to watch their family gather in the space where they had had family dinners together and everything. That was extremely emotionally impactful for me as a funeral director. And I was honored to be a part of that process. There was just so much love in every step that went from not only caring for him, but getting him to the house and then getting him to the funeral. I mean, by the end, I was hugging with the family. It was a very emotional day, but in a good way. So that was very, very impactful for me to see that beauty, how people just honor their loved one so naturally.
And I'm glad that, that sounds absolutely beautiful. And I'm glad it impacted you that way. And it's important for the viewers to know that, When you're performing a service, in particular, like a natural burial in someone's home, it's so intimate. You're almost, you're becoming part of the family in a sense that they're sharing this most intimate moment, and they've chosen you. You've got the highest honor to serve, and you never forget it. It's memorable, and it's a shared experience that the family never forgets either.
Yeah, it was
So,
almost like you said, so intimate. It was like they were opening their home to me. Like again, I know that I was there to do a job, but once we had their loved one in the home and settled, they're like, "Oh, can I get you like some tea? We're just gonna sit down and hang out." I mean, it was so, so beautiful.
well, and I'm glad you were able to share that, because I think I always tell people that, if you're ever fortunate enough to experience a natural burial, and of course you're never fortunate to go to someone's funeral, but if you're celebrating a life that was lived in this way, it brings you closer to death, because you become far less fearful of it, because of the physicality, the being intimately involved, and it changes how you think about death and dying and funerals. So you're doing great work. We really appreciate it at the Global Green Burial Alliance. And this brings me to my favorite part. I always like to ask this question. So for you, Kelsey, and Thibadeau Mortuary, where would you like to see your personal work and the mortuary's work, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years? Where would you like to see that fit in?
Yes. Well, obviously, I would love to see a further expansion on the interest in the area in green and natural burials. Education is one of my favorite things about this job. I last year had hosted a death cafe like event at actually a local bar that I used to bartend at because obviously once I started this job, my friends and, old coworkers started asking me questions and everything. And I was like, I'm like, why don't we just like kind of have an open forum here? And during that, we talked a lot about, natural burial and everything. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I would love to be, in the forefront educating people and also helping them have the farewell that they want and they know that their loved one deserves. Like you said, we're very lucky with the natural burial grounds that have been popping up all over the Baltimore, DC metro area. But in an ideal world, we would need a little bit more space because everybody would see the value and the beauty in having them return their loved one to the earth naturally. Like you were saying before, it brings you so much closer to death. And I think some people think that's negative, but I really see it as a positive. In recent years, I feel like death is a thing that's happening over there, right? It's like, okay, mom was in a nursing home, and then the nursing home calls you and lets you know that mom died. I know everybody does not have the resources to have their loved one in home and be able to give them the care, but I feel like that's just kind of another avenue where our society is disconnected from death. And just seeing the advent of this natural burial movement makes me hopeful that we are reconnecting not only with ourselves, but with our relationship to death.
Well, you know what? That was really beautifully put. And we here at the Global Green Burial Alliance would always welcome, if you ever feel as if you have a message or you'd like to be part of some sort of educational programming, you always let us know, because we're looking for content for our viewers. Anyone watching this today, support Tibido Mortuary and Kelsey's work, Little Angels program. I'm sure, you do advocacy already in Maryland. So, keep up the good work. Thanks for visiting us today, Kelsey. And viewers can learn more by visiting interfaithfunerals.com. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ed, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
You're very welcome. So let's be here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. See you at the next one.